June 6, 1944. Imagine waking up before sunrise and looking across the dark waters of the English Channel. The sea is covered with thousands of ships. The sky is filled with aircraft. More than 150,000 soldiers are preparing to risk everything. Many know they may never see another sunrise. Now imagine being Adolf Hitler. The man who once believed his empire would last 1,000 years is sleeping, while the greatest military invasion in human history is about to begin. This is the story of D-Day, the battle that shattered Hitler's dreams, changed the course of World War II, and became one of the most extraordinary examples of courage the world has ever witnessed. Stay with me until the end, because this story is not only about war, it is about determination, sacrifice, leadership, and the incredible power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when history calls their name. To understand D-Day, we must first understand the terrifying situation facing the world in 1944. For years, Nazi Germany had conquered nation after nation. Under Adolf Hitler, German forces had swept across Europe with frightening speed. Poland had fallen, France had fallen, Belgium had fallen, the Netherlands had fallen. Much of Europe was now under Nazi control. Millions lived under occupation. Fear became a daily reality. Families were separated. Resistance fighters risked execution. Entire communities lived under the shadow of dictatorship. Although the Allies had achieved important victories in North Africa and Italy, the heart of Hitler's empire remained untouched. Everyone knew one thing: to defeat Nazi Germany, the Allies would eventually need to invade Western Europe itself. But how? The English Channel stood between Britain and occupied France. German forces had spent years building powerful coastal defenses known as the Atlantic Wall. Hitler believed these defenses would stop any invasion. Massive bunkers lined the coast. Heavy artillery pointed toward the sea. Machine gun positions overlooked beaches. Millions of mines were planted. Steel obstacles waited beneath the waves. German commanders expected an attack someday. The only question was, where and when? Meanwhile, Allied leaders were planning something so ambitious that many believed it might fail. The operation was called Operation Overlord. Its goal was simple to describe but incredibly difficult to achieve. Land a massive army in Nazi-occupied France, establish a foothold, push inland, liberate Europe, and ultimately destroy Hitler's regime. The planning was unlike anything in history. Military leaders from multiple nations worked together for months. Maps covered entire walls. Weather reports were studied constantly. Intelligence officers analyzed every possible detail. Engineers designed special equipment for the invasion. Thousands of ships had to be prepared. Thousands of aircraft had to be coordinated. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers had to be trained. Every detail mattered. A single mistake could lead to disaster. The supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force was General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The responsibility resting on his shoulders was enormous. If the invasion failed, the war could continue for years. Millions more might die. Entire nations were depending on the success of this operation. Yet there was another challenge. The Germans could not know where the invasion would occur, so the Allies launched one of the greatest deception campaigns ever attempted. Fake armies were created. Inflatable tanks were positioned across England. Wooden aircraft were placed in fields. False radio messages were transmitted. German intelligence was deliberately fed misleading information. The goal was to convince Hitler that the main invasion would occur at Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. Remarkably, the deception worked. Even when Allied troops eventually landed in Normandy, many German commanders initially believed it was merely a diversion. This confusion would become a crucial advantage. As spring turned into summer, the invasion date approached. Across England, soldiers waited. Americans, British, Canadians, and troops from many other Allied nations. Some wrote letters home. Some prayed. Some joked with friends to hide their fear. Others quietly wondered if they would survive. Many were barely out of their teenage years, yet they were preparing to participate in an event that would shape world history. Then came another problem: weather. The English Channel is unpredictable, and conditions became dangerous. Strong winds and rough seas threatened the operation. Meteorologists studied every available forecast. Finally, they identified a narrow window. June 6, 1944. The decision was made. The invasion would proceed. On the night before D-Day, thousands of paratroopers boarded aircraft. Their mission was among the most dangerous. They would land behind enemy lines before the beach assaults began. Their objectives included capturing bridges, disrupting German communications, and preventing enemy reinforcements from reaching the beaches. As darkness covered Europe, the aircraft took off. Engines roared through the night. Inside, soldiers sat silently. Many checked their equipment repeatedly. Some looked at photographs of loved ones. Others stared into space, lost in thought. Nobody knew exactly what awaited them below. Shortly after midnight, the first paratroopers began jumping into occupied France. The invasion had begun. Far below, confusion erupted. Some units landed far from their intended targets. Others encountered fierce resistance. Yet despite the chaos, countless acts of bravery unfolded. Small groups of soldiers improvised. Officers adapted to changing circumstances. Mission objectives were pursued even when original plans collapsed. This ability to adapt would become one of the defining characteristics of D-Day. Meanwhile, out at sea, an astonishing sight was unfolding. An armada unlike anything the world had ever seen moved toward Normandy. Thousands of vessels crossed the channel. Warships, transport ships, landing craft, support vessels. The horizon seemed endless. The largest amphibious invasion in human history was now underway. As dawn approached, soldiers packed into landing craft looked toward the French coastline. Many could now see the beaches where history awaited them. Some felt fear. Others felt determination. Most felt both. They knew the next few hours might decide the future of Europe, and perhaps the future of the world itself. Before we continue to the brutal fighting on Omaha Beach, Utah Beach, Gold Beach, Juno Beach, and Sword Beach, take a moment to reflect on this incredible lesson from history. Great achievements often begin with uncertainty. The soldiers crossing the channel did not know exactly what would happen. They moved forward anyway. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is moving forward, despite fear. If you agree that true courage means acting even when the outcome is uncertain, write courage in the comments below. And if you're enjoying this journey into one of history's greatest mysteries and battles, don't forget to like, subscribe, share this video, and support the channel if you feel inspired by these stories. Your support helps us continue uncovering the most thrilling mysteries of history. Because what happens next on the beaches of Normandy will become one of the most dramatic and heroic chapters ever recorded, and the fate of Hitler's empire is about to begin unraveling. As the first light of June 6, 1944 spread across the Normandy coastline, thousands of Allied soldiers stared toward the beaches that stood between them and history. Behind them stretched the largest invasion fleet ever assembled. Ahead of them waited machine guns, artillery, mines, bunkers, and battle-hardened German defenders. There was no turning back. For years, the world had been waiting for this moment. Now, it had arrived. As Allied warships opened fire on German coastal defenses, explosions thundered across Normandy. Massive shells slammed into bunkers and defensive positions. Smoke rose into the morning sky. The ground shook. The sea shook. The air itself seemed to tremble. Yet despite the bombardment, many German positions remained intact. The soldiers heading toward the beaches would soon discover that some of the deadliest obstacles were still waiting. The invasion beaches were divided into 5 main sectors. Utah Beach and Omaha Beach were assigned primarily to American forces. Gold Beach and Sword Beach were assigned to British troops. Juno Beach was assigned to Canadian forces. Each beach had its own challenges. Each would produce its own heroes, and each would help determine the future of Europe. Among all the landing zones, Omaha Beach would become the most famous, and the most terrifying. As American landing craft approached Omaha, soldiers could hear bullets striking metal before the ramps even dropped. German machine gun positions overlooked nearly every approach. The defenders occupied elevated positions that gave them a devastating advantage. When the landing craft reached shore and the ramps opened, chaos exploded instantly. Machine gun fire swept across the beach. Mortar rounds crashed into the water. Artillery shells erupted among incoming troops. Many soldiers were hit before they could even step onto dry land. Others jumped into water that was deeper than expected and struggled under the weight of heavy equipment. Some drowned before reaching the shore. Those who survived raced desperately toward any available cover. But cover was scarce. The beach offered little protection. Sand, smoke, explosions, and fear filled every direction. Entire units became scattered. Officers were killed. Communication systems failed. Plans that had taken months to prepare suddenly became impossible to follow. For a brief moment, it appeared that the assault might collapse. German defenders watched wave after wave of soldiers struggle to advance. The casualties mounted rapidly. The situation was so dangerous that some commanders feared the invasion might fail right there on Omaha Beach. Yet something extraordinary happened. Leadership emerged everywhere. Not only from generals, not only from officers, but from ordinary soldiers. Men who had never commanded before suddenly took charge. Small groups formed. New plans were created on the spot. Instead of waiting for perfect instructions, soldiers adapted. One bunker at a time, one trench at a time, one obstacle at a time. Slowly, painfully, they began moving forward. This is one of the most important lessons in all of history. When plans fail, determination becomes more important than perfection. The soldiers at Omaha Beach could have surrendered to fear. Instead, they kept moving. Their courage transformed what looked like defeat into the beginning of victory. While Omaha Beach endured brutal resistance, events at Utah Beach unfolded differently. Strong currents pushed many landing craft away from their planned locations. Ironically, this navigational error helped some units avoid heavily defended areas. American troops encountered resistance, but they were able to push inland more effectively than expected. One famous commander reportedly remarked that since they had landed in the wrong place, they would simply start the war from there. It was a perfect example of flexibility under pressure. Across the Normandy coastline, British and Canadian forces were facing their own challenges. At Gold Beach, British troops fought through defensive positions while advancing inland toward key objectives. At Sword Beach, fierce combat erupted as British forces worked to secure territory and connect with airborne units that had landed during the night. Meanwhile, Canadian soldiers landing at Juno Beach faced intense opposition. The first wave suffered significant casualties, yet the Canadians pressed forward with remarkable determination. By the end of the day, some Canadian units had advanced farther inland than almost any other Allied force. Their performance became one of the most respected achievements of D-Day. Above the beaches, the battle extended into the skies. Thousands of aircraft filled the air. Fighter planes protected the invasion fleet. Bombers targeted enemy positions. Transport aircraft continued supporting airborne troops. The scale was almost impossible to comprehend. Every minute involved countless moving parts. Every decision affected thousands of lives. Meanwhile, behind German lines, paratroopers continued carrying out critical missions. Many had landed miles away from their intended drop zones. Some found themselves isolated. Others gathered into small groups of strangers. Yet they continued fighting. Bridges were captured. Roads were blocked. Communication lines were disrupted. German reinforcements were delayed. These actions would prove essential to the success of the invasion. Confusion spread through the German command structure. Reports flooded headquarters. Some officers believed Normandy was the main invasion. Others remained convinced that an even larger attack would occur elsewhere. The Allied deception campaign was still influencing German decisions. As a result, valuable time was lost. Critical reinforcements were delayed, and every hour that passed allowed Allied forces to strengthen their position. Then, there was Hitler himself. One of the most extraordinary facts about D-Day involves the German dictator. When the invasion began, Hitler was asleep. Some German commanders hesitated to wake him immediately. Important armored divisions required Hitler's authorization before being deployed. Hours passed. Those hours became incredibly valuable to the Allies. By the time major decisions were made, Allied forces had already established important footholds along the coast. History often turns on unexpected moments. A delayed decision, a misunderstanding, a few critical hours. Sometimes entire empires are affected by choices that seem small in the moment. Throughout the day, fighting continued relentlessly. The beaches became scenes of unimaginable sacrifice. Medics worked under fire. Engineers cleared obstacles while bullets flew overhead. Naval crews supported troops from offshore. Pilots risked their lives in dangerous missions. Every individual played a role. Every contribution mattered. As evening approached, the outcome remained uncertain. Thousands had been killed, wounded, or missing. Yet, despite the losses, something remarkable had been achieved. The Allies had secure positions on all 5 beaches. The invasion had not been pushed back into the sea. The foothold in France existed. It was fragile. It was costly, but it was real. And for the first time since Nazi Germany conquered Western Europe, a path toward liberation had been opened. The impossible was becoming possible. The wall that Hitler believed would protect his empire had been breached. The beginning of the end had arrived. Before we continue to the dramatic weeks that followed, and how Allied forces pushed deeper into France, eventually leading to Hitler's downfall, take a moment to consider the lesson these soldiers left for future generations. Success is rarely achieved without obstacles. Victory often belongs to those who refuse to quit when circumstances become difficult. If you believe perseverance can overcome even the toughest challenges, write "Never give up" in the comments below, because in the next chapter, we will witness how the success of D-Day triggered a chain of events that ultimately shattered Hitler's empire forever and changed the future of the world. As darkness settled over Normandy on June 6, 1944, exhausted soldiers finally had a moment to understand what they had accomplished. The beaches that had witnessed unimaginable bloodshed throughout the day were now in Allied hands. The cost had been enormous. Thousands were dead. Thousands more were wounded. Families across multiple nations would eventually receive heartbreaking news. Yet despite the sacrifice, one undeniable fact remained. The largest amphibious invasion in human history had succeeded. The foothold in France was secure, and for Adolf Hitler, the nightmare he had feared for years had finally become reality. The Atlantic Wall, which Nazi propaganda had claimed was nearly impossible to penetrate, had been breached. The Allies were now on the European mainland. The road to Germany had begun. But make no mistake, the success of D-Day did not end the war. In many ways, it marked the beginning of an even greater struggle. The German military remained powerful. Millions of soldiers were still fighting across Europe. Tank divisions remained operational. Defensive positions stretched across occupied territory. The Allies had won the landing. Now, they had to win Europe. In the days following D-Day, an endless stream of men, vehicles, supplies, ammunition, fuel, and equipment crossed the English Channel. The scale of logistics was astonishing. Historians often describe logistics as the invisible weapon that wins wars. D-Day proved this truth perfectly. An army cannot fight without food. It cannot advance without fuel. It cannot survive without ammunition. Every soldier on the front line depended upon thousands of people working behind the scenes. Engineers built temporary harbors, supply ships, unloaded equipment day and night. Medical personnel treated thousands of wounded soldiers. Mechanics repaired damaged vehicles. Communication teams coordinated operations. Victory depended on every role, not just those carrying rifles. This remains one of history's most powerful lessons. Great achievements are rarely the work of a single hero. They are usually the result of many people working together toward a common purpose. As Allied forces expanded their position in Normandy, they encountered another challenge: the countryside itself. The region contained dense hedgerows known as bocage. These natural barriers divided fields into countless compartments. For defenders, they created ideal ambush positions. For attackers, they created nightmares. German troops used the terrain expertly. Every field became a potential battlefield. Every corner could conceal danger. Advancing often required brutal close-range combat. Progress was measured not in miles, but sometimes in yards. The fighting became exhausting. Yet the Allies continued pushing forward. Step by step, village by village, field by field. The German military fought fiercely. They understood what was at stake. If the Allies broke through Normandy, the road into France would open. If France was liberated, Germany itself would eventually be threatened. The consequences were enormous. Meanwhile, inside Germany's leadership circles, frustration and panic grew. Hitler's confidence began to crack. For years, he had presented himself as an unstoppable leader. Now events were slipping beyond his control. Reports from the front became increasingly troubling. German commanders requested flexibility. Many wanted strategic withdrawals. Others recommended new defensive plans. But Hitler often refused. He demanded that positions be held regardless of circumstances. Retreat became politically unacceptable. As a result, German forces frequently found themselves trapped in situations that became impossible to sustain. One of the greatest weaknesses of dictatorship became visible. When leaders surround themselves with fear rather than honest advice, bad decisions become more likely. History repeatedly teaches this lesson. Strong leadership listens. Weak leadership demands obedience. The difference can determine the fate of nations. Then came one of the most significant breakthroughs of the campaign. In late July 1944, Allied forces launched Operation Cobra. After weeks of difficult fighting, American forces finally broke through German defensive lines. The breakthrough transformed the entire battlefield. Suddenly, mobility returned. Allied armored units surged forward. German formations struggled to respond. What had been a slow, grinding campaign suddenly became a rapid advance. The collapse accelerated. French towns and villages began witnessing scenes they had dreamed about for years. Liberation. Citizens emerged from homes. Flags appeared. Crowds gathered. Tears flowed. Celebrations erupted. For people who had endured occupation, fear, restrictions, and uncertainty, Allied soldiers represented hope. Hope that freedom would return. Hope that families could rebuild. Hope that a better future remained possible. Perhaps nowhere was this more visible than in Paris. The iconic French capital had spent years under Nazi occupation. Now, liberation approached. In August 1944, Allied forces and French resistance fighters helped free the city. The images became legendary. Crowded streets, cheering civilians, church bells ringing, smiles replacing fear. The liberation of Paris became a symbol for the entire world. It demonstrated that Hitler's empire was no longer expanding. It was collapsing. And once an empire begins collapsing, stopping the process becomes incredibly difficult. Across Europe, momentum shifted dramatically. The Allies advanced from the west. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union continued advancing from the east. Germany now faced powerful enemies from multiple directions. The pressure became overwhelming. Factories were bombed. Supply lines were disrupted. Resources became scarce. Experienced soldiers became increasingly difficult to replace. The military machine that once seemed unstoppable was slowly wearing down. Inside Germany, some officers reached a devastating conclusion. They believed Hitler was leading the nation toward disaster. In July 1944, a group of German conspirators attempted to assassinate him. The plot failed. Hitler survived. But the attempt revealed growing desperation within Germany itself. Even some of his own people no longer believed victory was possible. Yet the war continued. Months of fighting still lay ahead. Entire battles remained to be fought. Entire regions remained to be liberated. But after D-Day, the final outcome increasingly became a matter of when rather than if. The invasion had fundamentally changed the war. The Allies now possessed a permanent front in Western Europe. Germany could no longer focus its strength in one direction. Resources were stretched. Decisions became harder. Mistakes became costlier. The balance had shifted. By early 1945, Allied armies entered Germany itself. Cities that had once celebrated conquest now faced defeat. The Third Reich was collapsing from within. Finally, in April 1945, Adolf Hitler remained inside his Berlin bunker while enemy forces closed in from all sides. The empire he promised would last 1,000 years had survived barely 12. The dream of domination ended in ruins. Soon afterward, Hitler died. Germany surrendered. World War II in Europe came to an end. And when historians examine the turning points that made that outcome possible, D-Day stands among the most important. Because on June 6, 1944, thousands of ordinary men faced extraordinary danger. They crossed a hostile sea. They landed on heavily defended beaches. They endured fear, chaos, and sacrifice. And through their determination, they helped change the future of the world. Their story remains relevant today, not because most people will ever face a battlefield, but because everyone faces challenges. Everyone encounters obstacles. Everyone experiences moments when success appears impossible. The lesson of D-Day is that impossible situations can be overcome when courage, preparation, teamwork, and persistence come together. History is not only about the past, it is also a guide for the future. And few events demonstrate that truth more clearly than D-Day. If this incredible story inspired you, type "Freedom Prevails" in the comments below. And remember this powerful truth. Empires built on fear may appear strong, but courage, unity, and determination have the power to change the course of history. Thank you for watching until the end. If you found value in this journey through one of history's greatest battles, please like, subscribe, and share this video with fellow history lovers. And if my words brought you knowledge, inspiration, or a deeper appreciation for the sacrifices of the past, your support for the channel is always appreciated. Because here, we continue uncovering the most thrilling mysteries, battles, and untold stories that shaped our world.